I woke up to the sound of birds chirping and the smell of fresh coffee wafting through my kitchen. It was supposed to be a peaceful Saturday.
What are you doing?
I had plans to take my daughter to the park, grab groceries, and maybe even get ahead on some weekend chores. But the moment I stepped outside, everything changed. My driveway was empty. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful. I glanced around, scratching my head, wondering if maybe I'd parked on the street last night. But no, I never park on the street. I always park in my driveway. Always. Where's my car? I muttered under my breath, scanning up and down the street. My neighbor, Mrs. Klein, was walking her dog and gave me a sympathetic look. They towed it, she said casually, as though she was talking about the weather. What do you mean they towed it? I asked, my heart already racing. The HOA, she replied, pulling her dog back as he sniffed my mailbox. A tow truck came late last night. They hooked it up and took it away. I froze. The HOA? Why would they tow my car? I pay my dues on time. I follow every ridiculous rule they throw at us. I keep my grass trimmed to regulation height. I paint my mailbox every spring. I even hide my trash cans exactly where they tell us to. I pulled out my phone and called the towing company number that Mrs. Klein gave me. After 10 minutes on hold, a gruff man answered. Yeah, we got your car, he said. Picked up on request from the HOA. Reason, parking violation. Parking violation? I nearly shouted. I was parked in my own driveway. Take it up with your HOA, he said. You can pick it up Monday morning. Impound fee is $375 plus storage. My blood boiled. I slammed my phone down on the hood of my wife's car and marched back inside. This had to be a mistake. A clerical error. Something. I called the HOA office next, but of course, it went to voicemail. It was Saturday. Their smug automated message played, reminding me of their office hours and commitment to keeping our community beautiful. I paced my kitchen like a caged animal. My weekend plans were ruined, my bank account was about to take a hit, and worst of all, I was completely powerless until Monday. By evening, I was still fuming. I couldn't shake the image of my car being dragged off in the middle of the night like some criminal. I started combing through the HOA's online portal, reading every single bylaw and parking rule I could find. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, about parking in your own driveway being a violation. When my wife got home from work, she found me surrounded by printed out HOA documents, highlighter in hand. They messed with the wrong guy, I told her, my voice low and serious. I'm not just going to let this slide. She nodded, her expression dark. Good. Make them pay. That night, I barely slept. My car sat in some dirty impound lot miles away, racking up daily storage fees, and there was nothing I could do about it. But as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, an idea started to form in my mind, a plan to fight back, expose them, and make sure they never did this to me, or anyone else, again. Monday couldn't come fast enough. Monday morning arrived like a storm. I was waiting in the HOA office parking lot before the sun even came up, gripping a folder full of printed bylaws like it was a weapon. I wasn't leaving until someone explained why they thought they had the right to tow my car. At exactly 9:01 a.m., the office door unlocked, and the HOA president, Mr. Richard Hale, stepped inside with his usual air of superiority. He was dressed in his perfectly pressed black suit, HOA badge pinned proudly to his lapel, as if he were the sheriff of the neighborhood. I followed him inside before he could close the door. Mr. Hale, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, why was my car towed? He didn't even look surprised to see me. Good morning to you, too, he said coolly, setting down his leather briefcase. What seems to be the problem? You know exactly what the problem is, I shot back. You had my car towed, from my own driveway. There isn't a single bylaw that says I can't park there. I checked. Mr. Hale gave me the kind of smile that made my blood pressure spike. Actually, there is, he said, flipping open a binder on his desk. Section 14b, paragraph 3. It states that vehicles must be registered with the HOA and display an approved parking decal. Yours was not on file. I clenched my fists. I registered my car last year. Not according to our records. I could feel my temper rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing it here would only make me look bad. Then update your records, I said through gritted teeth. I'm not paying $375 to get my own car back for your mistake. Mr. Hale leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. Unfortunately, we don't cover towing fees. You'll have to pay to retrieve your vehicle. Consider this a warning to keep your registration current. A warning? I said, my voice rising. This isn't a warning, it's extortion. You had no right to touch my property. He shrugged. The board voted on it. It's done. I stormed out before I did something I'd regret. The smug look on his face was burned into my brain. This wasn't just about my car anymore, this was about power. Mr. Hale and his board thought they could do whatever they wanted, and I was determined to prove them wrong. That afternoon, I went to retrieve my car. The impound lot was as miserable as I'd imagined, a fenced-in patch of cracked asphalt, guarded by a grumpy man in a neon vest. That'll be $425, he said without looking up from his clipboard. It was $375 on Saturday, I snapped. Weekend storage fees, he said flatly. I bit my tongue, handed over my credit card, and watched as he brought my car around. Seeing it sitting there, dusty and scratched, made my anger flare all over again. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I pulled into the driveway, my wife came outside. Well, she asked. They made me pay, I said bitterly. But it's not over. I'm taking this to the next board meeting. She nodded, her jaw set. Good. Don't let them bully you. The next few days, I gathered evidence like a man on a mission. I found my original HOA vehicle registration approval email and printed it out. I took pictures of my driveway, my parking decal, everything. I even spoke to a couple of neighbors who admitted the HOA had towed their cars in the past for ridiculous reasons. By the time the board meeting rolled around, I was ready. The meeting was packed, apparently, I wasn't the only one angry with the HOA. People were murmuring, whispering about unfair fines, strange letters, and sudden rule changes. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the front of the room and laid out my evidence for everyone to see. This is proof, I said loudly, my voice echoing off the walls, that the HOA illegally towed my car. And if they can do it to me, they can do it to any one of you. Gasps rippled through the room. Mr. Hale's confident smile faltered for the first time. This is not the time or place for personal grievances, he said, but I cut him off. No, this is exactly the time and place, I said, my voice rising. You think you can intimidate us, but we're done staying quiet. We want answers. And judging by the nods and murmurs of agreement from the crowd, I wasn't the only one ready to fight back. The room was electric. I'd never seen so many neighbors show up to an HOA meeting before. Usually it was just the same 3 retirees and Mr. Hale's smug board members. But now? People were standing in the back, arms crossed, glaring at the board like they were waiting for a confession. Sit down, please, Mr. Hale said, his voice clipped. No, I said firmly, refusing to move from the center of the room. Not until you explain why my car was towed despite being properly registered. And not until you explain why you've been quietly changing rules without notifying homeowners. That last part made several people in the audience perk up. A woman in the front row raised her hand. They towed my husband's truck last month, she said. We thought it was our fault because we parked on the street overnight, but now I'm wondering if it wasn't. Another man stood up. They fined me $250 for having my trash can out 1 hour after pickup day. 1 hour. The room erupted into murmurs. Mr. Hale banged a small wooden gavel on the table, but it did nothing to calm the crowd. This meeting is out of order, he snapped. If you all cannot conduct yourselves appropriately, we will adjourn. Of course you want to adjourn, I said, my voice rising. You don't want us to hear the truth. You don't want us to know that you've been abusing your power. Mr. Hale's face turned red. Careful with your accusations, he said, his voice low and dangerous. But I wasn't backing down. You've been pocketing money, haven't you? I said, letting the words hang in the air. The room went dead silent. I didn't have proof, not yet, but I'd seen the financial statements on the HOA's website. Certain line items didn't add up. Thousands of dollars labeled as administrative expenses, yet the neighborhood pool was still closed for repairs and the playground equipment was falling apart. Where was all that money going? Mr. Hale's jaw tightened. You have no evidence, he said coldly. Not yet, I admitted, but I will. That night, I sat at my kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed, staring at my laptop screen. I downloaded every HOA document I could find, financial reports, meeting minutes, vendor contracts. The deeper I dug, the stranger it got. One vendor name popped up over and over again, Hale Property Services. I frowned. Hale. As in Richard Hale. I pulled up the state's business registry and, sure enough, there it was, Hale Property Services was owned by none other than our HOA president himself. So, Mr. Hale was signing HOA contracts to pay himself for maintenance services that were either never done or wildly overpriced. No wonder the HOA was so quick to tow cars and hand out fines. Every dollar they collected went right back into Hale's pocket. The next morning, I knocked on my neighbor Mrs. Klein's door and showed her what I'd found. This is corruption, she said, her eyes widening. You have to tell everyone. We can't just tell them, I said grimly. We need to show them. And we need to do it in a way Mr. Hale can't cover up. Mrs. Klein nodded slowly. Then we call an emergency homeowners vote. If you get enough signatures, you can force a recall election. It was risky, recall elections were rare and required a majority of the homeowners to agree. But if I could get enough people on my side, we could remove Mr. Hale and the entire board. That afternoon, I printed out petition forms and started knocking on doors. Some neighbors were hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation from the HOA, but as soon as I explained about Hale Property Services, their hesitation turned into anger. They've been stealing from us, one man growled. Where do I sign? By evening, I had over half the neighborhood's signatures. And that was just the first day. But as I walked back to my house, tired but satisfied, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A black SUV was parked at the end of my street, engine running, headlights off. As I got closer, the SUV suddenly sped away. Coincidence? Maybe. But deep down, I knew Mr. Hale had just realized I wasn't going to stop. And he wasn't going to let me win without a fight. By the next morning, word had spread through the entire neighborhood about my petition. People were stopping me in the street, offering signatures, encouragement, and even baked goods for the man who's finally standing up to Hale. But with every new signature, I could feel the pressure mounting. Something was going to give, and it gave sooner than I expected. When I stepped outside to get the mail, I found a bright orange notice taped to my front door. HOA violation notice, unapproved landscaping, $500 fine. I stared at it in disbelief. My lawn was perfect. My flower beds were immaculate. I'd followed every landscaping rule in the book. This wasn't a violation, it was retaliation. As if that wasn't enough, a few hours later, my internet went out. I called the provider, only to learn someone had called earlier claiming to be me and requested a service suspension until further notice. And that night, just as I was sitting down for dinner with my family, I heard the roar of an engine outside. I rushed to the window just in time to see a tow truck idling at the end of my driveway, again. I bolted outside, heart hammering in my chest. You're not taking it. I shouted, standing between the truck and my car. The driver shrugged. Got an order from the HOA. Said this vehicle's not in compliance. This is harassment. I yelled. You touch my car, and I call the police. The driver hesitated, muttered something into his radio, then finally pulled away. I stood there shaking, my neighbors watching from their porches. Mr. Hale was sending me a message, stop or else. That night, I called an emergency neighborhood meeting at my house. People crowded into my living room, sitting on couches, chairs, and even the floor. They're targeting me now, I said, holding up the violation notice. They cut my internet, they tried to tow my car again, all because we're this close to taking them down. A murmur of outrage rippled through the crowd. This is criminal, Mrs. Klein said. You should call the police. I will, I said, but first we finish what we started. We have enough signatures for a recall vote. We just have to deliver them at the next board meeting, and make sure everyone in the neighborhood shows up to vote. One of my neighbors, a quiet guy named Miguel, raised his hand. You know Hale's not going to go quietly, right? He's going to try something. Then let him try, I said, feeling my anger transform into something sharper, determination. We do this publicly, with witnesses, so he can't make it disappear. The day of the board meeting felt like a showdown in an old Western movie. The community center parking lot was packed. People who had never attended a meeting in their lives showed up, some carrying homemade signs that read Stop HOA Corruption and Recall Hale Now. When I walked in, Hale was already seated at the head of the table, flanked by his board members. His smile was gone. I see you've brought an audience, he said coldly. I brought the homeowners, I corrected, holding up the thick stack of signed petitions. And we're here to demand a recall election. The room erupted in cheers. Hale slammed his gavel. Order! This meeting is not. It is, I cut him off, stepping closer. According to HOA bylaws, Section 10D, if more than 50% of homeowners sign a petition, a recall election must be scheduled within 30 days. We have 73% of homeowners' signatures. You can't ignore this. For a moment, Hale just stared at me, his face pale. Then his expression darkened. You're making a mistake, he said softly, so only I could hear. You think you're the hero, but you're not. You don't know who you're dealing with. I leaned in, meeting his glare. Then I guess I'll find out. The board was forced to vote, and under the weight of dozens of angry homeowners, they reluctantly scheduled the recall election for the following week. As people filed out of the meeting, cheering and clapping me on the back, I noticed Hale still sitting there, motionless, his fists clenched on the table. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that unsettled me, fear. But fear of what? Losing his position? Or losing something much bigger, something I hadn't uncovered yet? I didn't know it at the time, but the final confrontation was coming, and it was going to change the neighborhood forever. The night of the recall election felt like a trial, and Richard Hale was the man on the stand. The community center was packed again, standing room only. People were buzzing with anticipation, whispering about the vote, about me, about Hale. I could feel the tension in the air. This was more than just a neighborhood meeting. This was about taking back control. Hale sat at the head of the table as usual, but he didn't look as confident as before. His HOA badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but his shoulders were tense. His board members exchanged nervous glances. Let's get this over with, Hale said flatly, his voice cracking just a little. The HOA secretary stood and explained the process. Each homeowner would cast a ballot for or against recalling the current board. The ballots were counted in full view of everyone. When it was my turn, I walked slowly to the front of the room and dropped my vote into the box. People clapped quietly. It felt symbolic, like dropping a stone into a pond and watching the ripples spread. One by one, every homeowner voted. The room was silent except for the sound of papers shuffling and pens scratching. Finally, the secretary began counting. My heart pounded as the numbers climbed. Yes, 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 she muttered, separating the votes into 2 stacks. Hale was sweating now. He drummed his fingers on the table, his jaw tight. When the counting was done, the secretary looked up. The vote is 61-9 in favor of recall, she announced. The room erupted into cheers. People were hugging each other, high-fiving, cheering like their favorite team had just won the championship. But Hale didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the table. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice low. "You think you've won, but you haven't." I stepped forward. "Oh, it's over," I said, pulling out the last piece of evidence I had saved for tonight, a printed copy of the vendor contract showing Hale paying his own company thousands of dollars. "This," I said, holding it high so everyone could see, "is proof that Richard Hale has been using our HOA dues to line his own pockets. He's been stealing from us for years." The room went dead silent for a moment, then exploded into angry shouts. "Is that true?" someone demanded. Hale stood, his face pale. "Those contracts were approved by the board." "Your board," I cut him off. "Your friends. Your rubber stamps. But now they're gone. And so are you." Two homeowners who had clearly had enough stepped forward and escorted Hale out of the room. He didn't fight them, he just kept muttering under his breath as he disappeared into the night. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. The new board, made up of actual volunteers who cared about the community, canceled unnecessary fines, rewrote confusing bylaws, and cut ties with Hale Property Services. The money that used to vanish into administrative expenses was put to work repairing the pool, fixing the playground, and planting new trees along the walking trail. One sunny Saturday, I stood in my driveway, car parked exactly where it belonged, and watched my daughter ride her bike down the street. Neighbors waved as they passed, smiling for the first time in months. My wife came out and slipped her arm around my waist. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," I corrected, nodding toward the neighborhood. "All of us." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt at peace. Mr. Hale was gone. Justice had been served. And the HOA had finally been reminded of something they'd forgotten long ago. This neighborhood belongs to the people who live here, not the ones who try to control them.